Auckland. The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Talking politics with Phil Goff.
Indeed, Phil Goff, leader of the Labour Party, joining us this morning. Hello to you, Phil.
G'day, Wammo.
Now, I was just wondering if you had any advice this morning for JK as he heads over to Washington. He's got a meeting with Joe Biden, the Vice President, this evening.
Yeah. I met Biden last year in Chile and found him a good person to deal with. And I think he is a person that would be sympathetic to New Zealand's positions. Look, advice for the Prime Minister. I think we're at a stage now where we can make a real difference in nuclear disarmament. For 8 years under the Bush administration, there was just no progress at all. But Barack Obama has talked about, himself having a vision of a world free of nuclear weapons. We've got the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, talking about a 5-point plan, a convention to remove and dismantle nuclear weapons. This is a time when New Zealand could fulfill its historical role, actually, of being a small but fiercely proud and independent country that can make a real difference because of its strong principles in this area.
What do we do? We just say, look, we're not into nuclear weapons. What more can we do?
Oh, there's a lot of things that we can do. I mean, you look over history, and it was New Zealand that began the protests against open-air nuclear testing against the French, took them to the International Court of Justice. In 1986, we made New Zealand, by legislation, the first country in the world to be nuclear-free. The last couple of years, when I was Minister of Disarmament, we moved through the United Nations a resolution to take nuclear missiles off high alert that got support from 130 countries. We were one of 6 countries that passed a convention banning cluster munitions. So there's a lot that a little country can do if you've got the courage and the determination and the vision to actually do it. And I think what New Zealand should be doing now is backing Ban Ki-moon as strongly as we can for a convention to eliminate the nuclear weapons stockpile. I think Obama's right. The real problem now is not between states. It's the fear that terrorists will get their hands on missiles or nuclear material. And, of course, anybody that's prepared to destroy their own life in a suicide bombing, it doesn't matter whether they kill 40 people or 4 million people. Yeah. That's the terror scenario that we face today. The best way to reduce that risk, of course, is to eliminate the materials that nuclear weapons can be made out of and eliminate nuclear weapons. Imagine Pakistan, if it was taken over by an extremist government. That's a nuclear armed country. The real scenario around the misuse of nuclear weapons is actually more frightening than it was before, not less.
But what to do with a problem like North Korea?
Well, I think the first thing that you've got to do, we're parties to a non-proliferation treaty, but a lot of countries like India, like Pakistan, and probably Iran and North Korea are saying, well, that's all very well. 5 countries in the world have nuclear weapons officially, and then they're saying nobody else can have them. Where's the moral high ground in that? I think you've got to get the whole weight of international opinion on every state, including North Korea and Iran, that they cannot do this. There are sanctions against doing it, and the moral high ground is saying that the quid pro quo for the nuclear weapon states originally, when we signed the non-proliferation treaty, was that they would start to disarm. Now, they're starting to do that on the fringes now, but for years they did nothing while demanding that nobody else had weapons.
Yeah. You got to act at home first, really, don't you?
Well, yeah. I think you got to lead from the front, and I think the whole of the international community has got to be determined to rid the world of nuclear weapons. And the conference in Washington recognises the fact that the more nuclear weapons that you have, the greater the prospect that a terrorist one day, somehow, somewhere, will get their hands on that, and that could have cataclysmic effects for millions of people.
Well, what do you make of former Labour Prime Minister Geoffrey Palmer's statement last week where he said that we should be letting US warships in?
Well, Geoffrey's not actually saying anything radical. What the 1986 legislation does is prevents any nuclear-armed or powered ship coming into New Zealand. But we've always welcomed other naval vessels here from nuclear weapon states. We've had Chinese warships here, we've had French warships here, we've had British warships here. We've never had any objection per se to having American warships here. We just insist that wherever those warships come from, they meet the conditions of our legislation that we can certify that they are non-nuclear armed or powered. And on those conditions, there's no greater reason to oppose a warship coming from the United States as there is one from Britain, France or China. So I don't think Geoffrey Palmer was saying anything radical, and in fact I think we'll start to see American warships, but starting probably with the Coast Guard, visiting New Zealand as they become accustomed to the fact that New Zealand isn't going to change its legislation and its requirements, and that we have sovereignty over what happens in our own territory.
But don't they have that policy of neither confirm nor deny whether or not their ship is even powered by nuclear energy?
Yeah, but we know all the ships that are powered by nuclear energy, and we know that surface naval vessels in the US Navy now no longer carry nuclear weapons. So there's no rocket science, so to speak, in determining which ships might be nuclear armed or not. There is we have a mechanism under the law that we use whenever a naval vessel comes to New Zealand, and we can be confident in the results of that mechanism.
So if a ship turned up with a certain name that or a ship that wanted to come with a certain name that we knew was powered by nuclear energy, we'd still say no.
Yeah,
okay.
And that's in line with our legislation, and there's no appetite amongst New Zealanders to change our legislation. We're very proud to be nuclear-free as a country.
Okay. Now, on the video stream this morning, I've got a picture of you in an Iroquois helicopter. I'm not sure how long ago that was taken, but it's you in the back. You're wearing a nice, crisp white shirt, I think. Now, the reason why I've got that picture of you up there is just because there was a little bit in the Sideswipe column in the Herald this morning. I'm not sure of the exact details of this because it's not very clear, but it says that some Iroquois, New Zealand Iroquois, were spotted on the US television show called Survivor in Samoa or somewhere. And a soldier obviously written in and said, after 6 days of patrolling in the East Timorese jungle as a New Zealand peacekeeper, we reached our rendezvous point with the Air Force. We secured the position and were told to walk back as there were no Air Force assets available to pick us up. Nice to see they can spare 4 Air Force Iroquois helicopters in Samoa to fly in the cast for the cast and crew for the US TV show. Now, I'm not sure whether or not that that New Zealand soldier was talking about an event a long time ago, say in 2000, 2001, where they were patrolling Timor, or it's recent when they were actually when this Iroquois helicopter was in Samoa. I don't know, but...
Yeah. Okay, let's make clear that that picture of me and the Iroquois had nothing to do with either event. But after that, look, the first priority for the use of New Zealand military aircraft, the Iroquois, has got to be to fulfil the functions of the New Zealand military. If they did something for survivors, if it was part of a training exercise, fine. But, it's clear-cut to everybody that is not a priority event unless it suits the training needs of the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and it certainly wouldn't be a priority over deployment and picking up of New Zealand troops that are stationed in any other country. So I don't think there's a big deal there, provided the right judgment was made by the New Zealand Defence Force that doing something for the survivors was simply as part of a training exercise for the pilots, rather than big noting, and I think it probably was the former.
But they might have got paid. They might have got paid quite well for it.
You'd think that with a commercial program, they could have made a contribution towards the cost of it. It wasn't what you'd call a humanitarian mission. Look, I don't know the details of that, Wammo, but all I can say is that you wouldn't be doing it for the sake of doing it. You'd only be doing it if it was part of a training exercise. Otherwise, it wouldn't be warranted.
Yeah. All right. Hey, thanks very much, Phil.
Okay, Wammo,
Cheers.
good to talk to you, mate. We'll catch up with you next week.
See ya. It is Phil Goff, leader of the Labour Party. Track now from Shapeshifter. This here is called Voyager on the